The time Timothy Keller spoke at Google and confronted them on some of their views about God, part 3. All right, so if you guys didn't know, we've been going through this clip from Timothy Keller's view, Making Sense of God. It's a book he wrote, and then he did this talk at Google that is really, really good, and we just kind of been breaking it up into bite-sized pieces because there's a lot of depth here, and there's a lot of richness in theology, apologetics, philosophy, reason, logic, all these things.
Every other religion says you find who you are by connecting to something more important than you. The secular culture says you find your identity by looking inside and doing whatever you think you want to do most, and you assert it over and against everybody else. And lots of studies have shown that that kind of identity, which is really unique, it's not the way it works in the rest of the world or in history, makes you incredibly fragile because you desperately need a kind of recognition that it actually can enslave you. Thirdly, it's not just a problem of meaning and a problem of identity, it's also the problem of freedom. Modern culture defines freedom as the absence of restrictions.
Modern culture defines freedom as the absence of restrictions. Do what thou wilt, right? That's how secular culture would define what freedom is.
Isaiah Berlin, the philosopher Isaiah Berlin, said there's two kinds of freedom. There's negative freedom, there's positive freedom. Negative freedom is freedom from.
Yes.
Positive freedom is freedom for. Negative freedom simply says, I'm only free if I have no restrictions at all. And I hope you all know that that means, if that's really what freedom is, then that is antithetical to love.
Woo! Freedom from and freedom for. I am free to pursue my God-given purpose, right? The desires that God has placed in me to live his ways. I'm free from the bondages of sin versus I'm free to do whatever I want.
Because the more committed your love relationship is, the less free you are. And yet, by the way, the more you are in a wonderful, committed love relationship, generally, the happier you are. The fact is, we've got a culture that and a belief.
Because a loving relationship comes with guardrails. A loving relationship comes with boundaries.
It doesn't support positive freedom. It only supports negative freedom. And as a result, freedom actually tends to eat up love relationships. And it's one of the reasons why we have fewer and fewer lifetime committed love relationships, because the view of freedom that comes from highly individualistic view that goes along with the secular view undermines that. There's a whole lot of emotional problems, but then there's the rational problems, and I'll just simply mention them. There's the problem, by the way, of existence itself. There are really good arguments that say it's difficult to understand, if there is no God, why there's something rather than nothing. If you want to ask me about that, we can go into it, but it's one of the problems you have if you don't believe in God. Another problem you have if you don't believe in God is the problem of moral obligation. If you don't believe in God, no trouble accounting for moral feelings. Like, you have moral feelings, right? Everybody in this room has some things you feel, I feel this is right, I feel this is wrong. And if you don't believe in God, no problem explaining them. It could be evolution, that's why we have those feelings, or it could be your culture has taught you those things, or it could be an existential choice of yours, whatever. But if there's no God, it's hard to see how there could be moral obligation. See, a moral feeling says, I feel this is wrong. A moral obligation is to say, you must stop doing that whether you feel it's wrong or not. How can you say to another person, even though you feel it's okay, it's wrong, and you ought to, obligation, stop doing it?
Yeah, because morals become personal and subjective instead of external and objective. So you have no grounds to tell anybody to do anything.
Why should your feeling trump that person's feeling? Well, the only way to say that is to say there's a higher law, there's something outside, there's a moral source outside of both of us, and we all have to honor that. But what could that be if there's no God? Martin Luther King Jr., in his famous letter to Birmingham jail, put it like this. He said, if there's no higher divine law, if there's no God, no higher divine law, there would be no way to tell if a particular human law was unjust or not. Because it would just be my feelings versus your feelings.
Right.
Big problem. Lastly, the beauty that we find within it. Christianity has a beauty to it. I mean, first of all, there's the idea that God, the Christian idea of God is that God is not an individual, but God is a Trinity of three persons who've known and loved each other from all eternity. And you all know, if you're ever even if you're into a love relationship, that's when you're really the happiest. So if you have Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, according to the Christian teaching, having perfect love relationships for all eternity, they were utterly happy, totally happy, you might say. Why would you create a world filled with other personal beings if you're already perfectly happy? And the answer is to share your happiness with them. There's no other good reason.
Hey, you want to see something kind of crazy? Over 75% of the people that watch this channel are not subscribed. Please consider subscribing and turning your bell notification on so that you don't miss anything we have going here. All right? Peace.
You already have everything. Why would he? So the Christian idea is that God actually created us to share his happiness and love. Then secondly, the Christian story is that we turned away from him. And that's the reason why things fall apart. The center cannot hold. Mere anarchy is loosed upon the world. Christianity has a story of what happened to the universe that explains both the ruin and the glory of the human race. Any story that just looks at human beings as trash, or any story that looks at human beings as basically good and does not recognize the good and the evil in them, doesn't really account for how things are. It doesn't lead you to expect what's going to happen tomorrow. And so Christianity, the beauty of the story is a God who wants to share his love and happiness with us, an account of what's wrong with us. Then thirdly, a love story. He comes into the world as Jesus Christ. Dorothy Sayers was one of the first women who ever went to Oxford, and she wrote detective novels. And one of her detectives was Lord Peter Wimsey, and she wrote a series of stories and novels about him. He solves, mysteries. Halfway through the stories, suddenly a woman shows up named Harriet Vane. She's one of the very first people who ever, she's one of the very first women who went to Oxford, and she was also one of the very first. She also wrote mystery stories. So Harriet Vane character shows up in the Peter Wimsey stories. She's one of the first women graduates of Oxford. She writes mystery stories, and she's not particularly good looking. Wait a minute, who is this? Dorothy Sayers, which many people believe, looked at this character that she had created, saw how lonely he was, and wrote herself into the story out of love. And Harriet Vane saves him. And of course, the Christian story is, you might say, oh, that's sweet, what a sweet idea. The Christian story is that's exactly what God did. He looks into the world, he created, he sees us harming each other, ruining each other, and he writes himself into the story. And in Jesus Christ, he goes to the cross and dies to pay for our sins so that God can forgive us and still be a just God.
And he just preached the gospel to them, if you think about it. That's so cool. The approach in this is making sense of God, invitation to the skeptical, this whole bit, but then he's talking about the beauty within Christianity, right? And he's preaching the gospel to them, clear as day.
If you're a judge, you can't just forgive people. The law needs to be paid. You can't just say, oh, it doesn't matter what you've done. You go off. Well, then justice falls apart. But how could God be both just and forgive us? And the answer was Jesus Christ. God, in a sense, writes himself into the story, and because he loves us and does all that for us. And that's the reason why, in the end, by the way, many people, if you read the Gospels, one of the main reasons that people come to believe in Jesus Christ is they read the Gospels and they see Jesus. They see his claims, they see his humility, they see his grace, they see his courage. And you read through the Gospels of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and you're amazed at this. And some years ago, there was a I knew who was confronted by an unbeliever who said, I would believe in God if you can give me a watertight argument. And the guy said, the minister said, read the New Testament. And he said, you mean there's a watertight argument there? He says, well, not exactly. There's Jesus Christ. And he says, what if God didn't give us a watertight argument to lead us to himself? What if he gave us a watertight person against whom in the end there is no argument? Read him and you'll see there's almost no way to account for the beauty of this person.
Woo! What if God didn't give us a watertight argument? What if he gave us a person? Wow. Wow, that's good. And listen, most folks, I feel like, who sit down and read the New Testament in a translation they can understand, it's very, 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 very difficult to look at the writing of the New Testament and be like, meh. I think there's something inside of us that reads that and goes, whoa, no, there's something here.
Unless maybe he is who he said he is. Okay, slightly longer than I wanted to go, and also slightly faster than I wanted to go, so I'm an unhappy guy. So let's see. Let's see what we can do. So those are some ways in which, why we need to worry about and be concerned about how people come to their beliefs, and how, if you...
First of all, it's amazing how much Timothy Keller squeezed into a 35-minute talk. This is incredible.
Or, how it's possible for Christianity to make sense even today.
Hey, this is a segment from our daily after party stream. Consider partnering with us online for as little as $5 a month to get access to these daily after party streams completely unedited. You'll also get access to our podcast as they are streamed live into the community before anyone else gets to see them, get to interact with our guests, get access to our private Discord server, and a discount code for our store for as little as $5 a month. Ultimately, that will help towards helping us continue contextualizing the gospel using media and podcast here on YouTube. All right, I'll see you over there. Peace.